More information is coming out about the conditions of Russian forces that defended the aggregate plant in Vovchansk. Were they abandoned by their commanders and sent to die for nothing? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's take a look at the least surprising story about Russian command. All right, so this is an aggregate of some of the information released by the Ukrainian Special Forces. This is Ukraine's defense intelligence units were the ones who actually planned and executed the operation to seize the Vovchansk aggregate plant. And while the operation was successful, eliminating the Russian defenders and seizing something in the range of 20 or 25 POWs, one of the things that has happened is that those POWs have given some pretty horrific stories about what it was like to hold the plant. One HRU officer said, the Russians in the plant suffered grave manpower losses because of their commanders through brutal violence, effectively condemning their soldiers to a senseless death. He says, quote, actually, Russian commanders were doing some terrifying, wild, and deranged things to their subordinates. It's about premeditated murders. It's about terror. This is another example where Russian soldiers have no rights as they are not seen as human beings at all. Now, let's take a look. One of the things that I was able to review, but I can't show here because of YouTube's terms of service, is actually the interrogation or interview of a Russian POW who was captured. Again, I'm using interrogation, but he looked like he was pretty chill. And I would be too, given the fact that the Ukrainians were probably treating him substantially better than any of his commanders. And to understand why, we're going to have to take a look at the map. But before we do that, of course, if you feel like you're surrounded on all sides and your command has abandoned you, well, I can't help you at that point. But if you are a little tired, you may want a little more caffeine. Check out Strike Gum. This is the energy drink alternative. It's got all the caffeine of a Red Bull, none of the sugar, and 100 milligrams of alpha GPC. If you are looking for a superior alternative to an energy drink, look no further than Strike Gum. We're the highest rated energy gum on Amazon, but you can also get it on strikegum.com. Plus, we have our subscribe and save here where you'll get free shipping if you subscribe and join the thousands of people who have already tried Strike Gum. And again, up to 50% of the people who chew it order again. So that's, to me, is the answer right there. We are the superior energy gum solution, better than any energy drink, certainly. So check us out, strikegum.com or on Amazon. Okay, so let's talk about this aggregate plant, right? The aggregate plant, you guys know that the Russians launched this offensive action towards Kharkiv. I think their goal was to put a lot of pressure onto Kharkiv, but it largely failed, right? With a small breakthrough, and then the Ukrainian forces were able to contain it with a little fanfare. And as a result, the Russian forces got bogged down, particularly in the small city of Vovchansk. And what happened is that there was an aggregate plant. This is a series of high concrete buildings that formed an industrial center for some kind of raw material, aggregate. And the Russian forces seized the buildings, but then in all the surrounding area, they were driven back by Ukrainian forces, except for the aggregate plant itself. The buildings were just too large, too complex, and the Ukrainians realized that it was just more efficient, just let the Russians sit. And the idea was that after a while, that the Russians would simply starve out. Well, the Russians have or starve out or retreat, right? Now, common sense would tell you that a tiny contingent trapped here should be freed as soon as possible. Simply, even if you don't care about the troops themselves, those troops are going to do a much better job and be more combat effective as members of a larger line unit instead of a small platoon or company-sized element just trapped in some buildings. But Russia seems to have a policy that says never, never retreat. And as a result, Russian commander said, no, we're not going to rescue you. Instead, we want you to just hold up here. Now, I want you to understand how long these guys have been holed up here. It hasn't been days. It hasn't been weeks. It's been months that these Russian forces were here. And the Russian command was only able to conduct resupply, according to these interviews, with drones. Now, you might think 100 people, right? Do the math with me here, right? You're talking, let's say you wanted to just sustain them. Just enough. Let's say you had 100 people let's say, be generous. Let's say they ate 1,200 calories a day. That's kind of the minimum to survive and continue to function. Times 100 people means every day they had to get 120,000 calories, right? To give you an idea, if you were to do it in just meat, right? If you were to do calories per pound of beef, let's say you were to just drop them just beef, you would need to drop something in the range of 120 pounds of beef a day, right around there. So obviously you can't do that with drones. So instead and remember, they don't just need meat, they need water, up to 1 gallon a day per person, and they need ammunition. And so the Russians would have to fly a single drone, sometimes as little as 1 drone or even no drones at all, into this aggregate plant to attempt to resupply them. This is why Russian commanders had said, really, they knew, basically probably on day one, I would say, that these Russians were going to starve inside this aggregate plant. The problem is Russian commanders, right, from the safety of their lines, told them, you're not going to retreat and you're not going to surrender. A result was that these troops would often have to try to catch wild animals, squirrels, cats, even abandoned pet dogs, one of them claimed. Oftentimes they would become so desperate that they would simply steal food from their comrades. And when a Russian soldier was caught stealing more than his share of food, the commanders would order him shot. You had some just absolutely horrific stuff. And again, I can't show the interview because YouTube won't let me show POWs in any capacity, which is probably fine. But the result, of course, was that this guy looked just rail thin. The fact that it took a week and that the Russians were continuing to fight despite months of being cut off and starved is kind of a testament to just the culture of fear and coercion among Russian troops, right? And the fact is that Russian troops have been in control of the plant for months at this point. So think about it. These guys were trapped here for months. The Russians never really made a big effort to get them out. The Russians never really made an effort to reinforce them in any meaningful way. And they just sort of sat there, which is, this is the most Russian thing I've heard, right? We've seen that Russians don't really put a lot of value in their troops protecting their lives. Just doesn't carry much weight with the Russian military, right? Troops are a resource meant to be expended, like a bullet. We don't worry about where the bullet is, and we certainly never try to recover a bullet that we fired. The Russians view troops in much the same way. There's also some footage, again, that I can't show you, but pictures of the Russian operations in Vovchansk that show just absolutely devastating losses by these troops. And you guys know that we actually supported the unit that's there defending Vovchansk, the Lyut Brigade of the Ukrainian National Police. And those guys have really apparently been doing some serious work. But now, of course, those Russians, some of them have lived and are now in Ukrainian POW captivity, where, frankly, if they're smart, they will ask not to be exchanged. But the Ukrainians don't want Russian defectors. What they want is their own people back. So they're going to likely be exchanged, and then they will be branded as traitors by the Russian military and likely sent back to the front line or killed. But while they are POWs, they're going to get to enjoy what the law of war mandates, which is the same rations that a Ukrainian soldier eats. And frankly, we've seen, if you've noticed that you haven't really seen a Ukrainian soldier who looks like they're starving, it's not an accident. It's because the Ukrainians actually give a shit about their people. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thanks so much to our Colonel tier members like Bill Collier, Robin Colburn, Gaius Marning, Gina Cuesta, Chris Gorsuch, Francis Carius, L90, and Petra Toru, as well as all of our Lieutenant tier members. If you want to get access to those that combat footage, it's at combatvetnews.com for members only. Thank you guys for your support. See ya. Cheers.